The old forest pressed close around them, its branches heavy with damp, its silence deeper than the hobbits had expected. It was not the silence of comfort, but the quiet of something listening, ancient and unkind. Frodo, Merry, Pippin, and Sam had come seeking a path through its tangled shade, but the forest had other desires. Roots seemed to shift, branches leaned down, and the air thickened until it seemed to weigh upon their small shoulders. When they were caught by Old Man Willow, held fast in a grip that felt like the forest itself had chosen to swallow them, their hearts faltered. The songs of childhood could not free them, and even courage felt pale against the strangling dark. It was then that a new sound entered, strange and startling, not because it was loud, but because it was utterly unafraid. A song drifted through the gloom, a lilting melody that seemed to carry its own light. The singer was unseen at first, yet the voice was clear, rolling like the play of a brook over stones, cheerful and unconcerned. "Hey dar, merry dar, ring-a-dong dillar," the voice rang, and with each phrase the darkness retreated a little. Then the figure appeared, sudden and vivid, as though he had stepped out from some forgotten tale. Tom Bombadil, a man in bright blue and yellow, boots of leather, hat tipped with a feather of an extraordinary hue. He strode toward them with a bounce in his step, and even Old Man Willow seemed to loosen his grip at the sound of that persistent song. Tom spoke to the tree as one might to an ill-tempered animal, half scolding, half laughing, commanding and yet affectionate, as though he knew the very core of its malice and dismissed it. With a sudden crack of bark and a groan of protest, the tree relented. The hobbits stumbled free, gasping, shaken and bewildered. Here was a savior who seemed unlike any they had known or imagined. He bore no weapon, carried no staff, and yet the forest obeyed him. His laugh was round, his eyes bright, and his manner filled with a careless ease that belied the gravity of the rescue. He introduced himself not with titles or histories, but with a playful charm that defied suspicion. Tom Bombadil, the master of wood, water, and hill, though not the master of any in the way the hobbits understood mastery. To them he seemed a riddle given shape, a man clothed in mirth and yet standing against dread. They followed him almost without question, for his presence promised safety, where the forest had offered only menace. He led them to his house, where a fire already burned, where the air smelled of herbs and bread, and where Goldberry, his lady, awaited. But even before that sanctuary, as they walked, the hobbits whispered among themselves, "Who was this man who sang and the trees obeyed? What manner of power was this, softer than a wizard's spell, stronger than a king's decree, yet spoken in rhyme and laughter?" Tom was not inclined to answer directly. He spoke in riddling turns, singing more than he explained, as though explanation was too small a vessel for his truth. When Frodo asked how he had driven off the willow, Tom only laughed and tapped his boot upon the ground, saying it was his business to know the trees and their moods. When Merry pressed him further, Tom simply sang again, a song about sunshine and morning dew. The mystery deepened not because he was silent, but because his words seemed too light for the weight of the questions they stirred. At the hobbits' table that night, as Goldberry poured water that sparkled like a river's memory, they listened to Tom speak of the forest as though it were his garden, the streams as though they were his kin. Yet he did not boast. His mastery seemed to rest not upon conquest, but upon harmony, a balance so old and so complete that it required no explanation. The hobbits, still recovering from fear, found themselves lulled by his voice, the cadence of his songs, and the sense that in his presence danger could not linger. It was as though the shadows knew to keep their distance, that if he was master, what lay beyond his bounds? Even in that moment of safety, Frodo wondered. Tom had said he was the oldest, that he was here before the river and the trees. Yet how could one who claimed such antiquity remain in such a narrow space, bounded by forest and hill? Why had they never heard of him in tales of great wars and ancient kings? The question lingered unspoken as they fell asleep that night, dreams filled not with fear of the willow, but with the strange melody that had cut through the forest's malice. The first sight of Tom Bombadil was not the meeting of hobbits and man, but the collision of two worlds, the world of struggle, fear, and fate, and the world of timeless mirth beyond fate's grip. He stood not as a warrior, nor a prophet, but as something older and lighter, as if the world had left a corner untouched by shadow. To the hobbits he was both comfort and puzzle, the brightest color in a landscape of growing dread. Yet as they drifted into sleep within his house, a gentle unease remained. What place had such a figure in the unfolding tale of the ring? Why did he seem so utterly free, and what price did that freedom demand? The journey to answer those questions would reach beyond the old forest, but it began here, in the bewildering song of a man who needed no weapon to command the dark. Morning in Tom Bombadil's house arrived not with the alarm of danger, but with the quiet unfolding of light across the room. The hobbits stirred to the sound of water outside, a river moving with deliberate calm, and to Goldberry's voice, bright and clear as if it were woven from the river itself, she called the day's beginning a gift, naming it fresh, naming it new, yet with the assurance of one who had seen countless dawns without weariness. Tom was already awake, his steps audible through the floor, humming tunes that seemed older than language, as though the world itself had borrowed melody from him rather than the other way around. At the table he welcomed them again with laughter and song, but between his cheerfulness lay words that deepened the mystery. Old Tom was here before the river, and the trees, he said almost idly, as though describing nothing more remarkable than a meal. The hobbits exchanged glances, uncertain if he spoke in jest, in riddle or in truth. But Goldberry confirmed it gently, with the serene certainty of one who does not exaggerate. She called him the eldest, though she explained no further. What could eldest mean in a world already filled with beings whose ages stretched beyond reckoning? The thought lingered. For the hobbits, time was a thing measured by seasons, by birthdays, by meals and harvests. Even the elves, ageless though they were said to be, carried stories of beginnings, of arrival in Middle-earth, of songs first sung and voyages first undertaken. Yet Tom seemed to stand outside those measures. He claimed no origin, offered no lineage, and bore no memory of coming into being. He was simply here, before rivers, before trees, before hills, a claim too vast to grasp, and yet his manner was so simple, so unpretentious, that to call him liar felt impossible. To situate such a figure within the wider frame of Middle-earth was a task beyond the hobbits. But the world's histories did offer patterns. They had heard of the Valar, great powers who shaped the lands and seas, of the Maiar, servants of flame, water, and song, of Melkor, who turned creation to discord, and of Sauron, who now bent wills to ruin. Against such tales, Tom did not fear. He held no throne, he waged no war, he bore no mandate. His song was not one of command from on high, nor of rebellion from below. It was something else, something woven into the soil itself, unaligned crown or rebellion, untouched by either triumph or fall. And yet, as they listened, it seemed clear that his existence bore a cost. For one who was outside time's burden, there could be no role in the story of time's passing. His indifference to dominion meant he could never be lord over realms, nor savior of peoples, nor conqueror of darkness. He endured, but he did not intervene beyond his narrow bounds. Perhaps this was wisdom, a kind of release from the endless cycle of striving. But perhaps it was also a form of exile, the price of standing apart. Frodo, watching him, wondered if it was loneliness disguised as mirth. But then Goldberry smiled, and the suspicion fell away. Tom was not alone, nor unloved. Still, the disquiet lingered, for what did it mean that such an ancient being lived so quietly, while elves and men shouldered the long tragedies of fate? Was there strength in his detachment or abdication? Could it be both at once? Later that morning, Tom led them outside. The old forest no longer seemed so oppressive in his company. Though the trees still bent low and whispered, Tom sang, and the forest answered, not in obedience but in recognition, like a child soothed by a father's voice. He pointed to the river Withywindle and said it had learned its winding ways from him. He spoke of stones older than memory, and of grasses that rose each year as if bowing to his presence. The hobbits listened with a mixture of awe and disbelief. If his words were true, then Tom was older not only than the land they walked, but perhaps older even than the struggles that defined their age. That thought carried weight, for the hobbits knew well the power of the ring they bore, knew it was the fulcrum of all things to come. If Tom was truly outside time, then was he not also outside the ring's reach? And if so, why should he not claim it, end the shadow, and free the world of its terror? They had no answer then, but the question's shadow already stretched before them. It would not be long before others, greater than hobbits, would ask the same. In Tom's laughter, however, the question dissolved, or at least was set aside. He did not fear the world's burdens, nor did he scorn them. He seemed content in being, content in song, content in the circle of forest and river. And in that contentment was a strange lesson, that existence might not need always to be defined by struggle, by crowns, by the endless succession of power's rise and fall. Tom was not part of that story, and perhaps that was why he endured. Yet there was a quiet unease in the hobbits, even as they smiled at his cheer. For the world they knew was not one that allowed such detachment to stand unchallenged. Darkness was rising, wars were kindling, and the ring burned cold upon Frodo's breast. Against such a tide, how long could one who stood apart remain untouched? The question did not break their rest that night, but it lingered, soft and persistent, like a note unresolved at the end of a song. Tom's claim of being first, of being before all else, left them with both wonder and unease. He was a presence outside history, older than memory, yet strangely bound to a small corner of the world. He was not absent, but neither was he engaged in the great weaving of fate. He was both master and outsider, both guardian and exile. And so, as the hobbits lay down once more in his house, lulled by the river's voice and Tom's faint humming in the distance, they carried within them a question that would follow their journey. If such a being truly was before time, why did he remain only here? The hobbits soon learned that Tom's realm was not infinite, though his laughter gave it the air of being without end. When he spoke of being master, he meant not of all the wide world, but only of what lay within the quiet circle of his keeping wood, water, and hill, the old forest, the flowing Withywindle, the soft barrows that rose with shadows of forgotten kings. Here his word was law, though it was never spoken as command. He named himself master not by conquest, but by presence, as though mastery could be achieved simply by dwelling so long in harmony that even the oldest roots and the most restless stones accepted it as the only way of things. Yet beyond those borders his voice faded, and the world resumed its struggles. The hobbits felt it most clearly when Tom led them to the edges of his land. He strode with light steps, his bright boots splashing through the shallows of streams, his song floating above the trees. The air was easy in his company, as though dangers bent aside to avoid his path. But as the borders grew near, a subtle change pressed upon them, an almost imperceptible lessening. The shadows grew darker, the wind more restless, and the trees seemed no longer to heed his voice in quite the same way. It was as though his mastery reached no further than the places that remembered him, and beyond that memory lay a silence indifferent to his song. This paradox puzzled the hobbits. How could one so ancient, who claimed to be eldest, confine himself to so small a dominion? If he had power to subdue the malice of Old Man Willow and scatter the wraiths of the Barrows, why not extend it further to shield the lands beyond? Tom himself seemed unconcerned. When asked, he laughed and spoke in riddles, saying that each master must keep to his own house and that the world beyond had its own guardians, its own tales to tell. He had no wish to stretch his hand where it did not belong. The hobbits pondered this quietly, for their minds were steeped in stories where mastery meant expansion, where lords sought to extend their sway, and where borders were always meant to be crossed. For Tom, the opposite seemed true. His strength lay not in expansion but in containment. He was the circle drawn upon the map that no one thought to enlarge, the place set aside where struggle was not allowed to enter. To him, mastery meant knowing every stream's turn, every root's secret, every bird's song within that circle, and not desiring more. And yet, there was a cost to such containment, for as the world changed, Tom did not. Kings rose and fell, shadow gathered, armies marched, and the fate of peoples was decided. But within his realm, the seasons only turned and returned. Outside, history roared forward. Inside, it hummed the same tune, unbroken. This was safety, but also estrangement. For if his mastery was confined, it meant that when the tide of darkness swelled beyond his borders, he would neither stand against it, nor be swept away. He would endure, but others would fall. The hobbits, though grateful for his shelter, could not ignore the quiet unease this raised. As they rested by the river with Goldberry gathering lilies nearby, Frodo considered the strange balance he witnessed. Within Tom's circle, time itself seemed reluctant to pass. The sun hung longer in the sky. The water sparkled as though each droplet carried its own memory of dawn. The grass bent beneath their feet, but sprang up unbent as soon as they passed. It was a world preserved, like a page pressed between the covers of a book, and yet the very perfection of it revealed its fragility. For the wider world was not preserved, and no page could remain unwrinkled forever while the fire of ages burned all around it. Tom seemed to sense Frodo's unspoken thought, for he laughed gently and said, "Outside the world weaves many tales, inside only mine. Each has its place." He offered no further defense, nor any lament. To him the circle was enough. But Frodo wondered, could any circle, no matter how perfect, remain untouched forever if the world beyond fell to ruin? Could even Tom's laughter outlast the silence that might follow, should the shadow claim all lands outside his borders? The paradox grew sharper as the hobbits prepared to continue their journey. Tom gave them gifts of wisdom and song, blessings to guide their way, but he made no move to accompany them. His task was here, though he called it no task at all. He would not ride with them into peril, nor would he seek to strike at the darkness gathering in the east. He would remain content and complete, master of a bounded land, unconcerned if the tides of history rose to his very threshold. The hobbits thanked him with deep gratitude, but unease clung to their hearts as they shouldered their pack. For mastery without expansion was alien to their understanding, and though it brought peace, it also carried the strange scent of irrelevance. Could one who remained so still be truly part of the story unfolding beyond his borders? Or was he only a witness, untouched and untouching, his strength hidden in a refusal to act? The hobbits could not answer, nor could Tom. He sang them on their way, his voice bright behind them, fading as the forest swallowed the sound. Yet even as they left, Frodo looked back once, and for a moment he thought he saw Tom standing at the edge of his realm, hat tipped, boots shining, as if watching them step into the weave of history from which he himself abstained. The image lingered long after, a reminder that some powers remain bound to their circles, not because they are weak, but because to extend themselves would mean ceasing to be what they are. And so, the hobbits carried with them both the comfort of his protection and the riddle of his limits. For in Tom Bombadil they had seen the greatest of paradoxes, the eldest of beings ruling the smallest of realms, the master of all within his bounds, yet unwilling to reach beyond them. It was a mastery that preserved but did not conquer, a guardianship that healed but did not save. The question it left behind was simple yet profound. If the world's fate was decided beyond his circle, what was the worth of mastery that remained within it? The memory of Tom's laughter still clung to them, when Frodo thought back to the strange music that had seemed to fill every space around him. It was not only the brightness of his words, but the way they carried power, a rhythm that moved through tree and stone as though the world itself leaned closer to listen. When Old Man Willow had loosened his cruel grip, it had not been by axe or flame, but by the weaving of a tune both playful and commanding. When Tom's boots had struck the earth in time with his refrain, the roots had trembled, and when his voice rose, the shadows sank away. The hobbits, unskilled in such matters, could only marvel that a song could hold such sway. Yet Tom sang as though it were the most natural thing in the world, as though to bind the land with melody was no more remarkable than breathing. In Middle-earth, song was no mere ornament. The elves knew this well, their laments preserving histories older than any scroll, their chants shaping memory into permanence. Gandalf's voice, too, could shift the hearts of men, carrying echoes of fire and authority. And before all there was the Ainulindale, the great music, when the world was first sung into being by powers greater than kings or armies. Each note of that music had formed hills and oceans, light and shadow. Against this backdrop, Tom's cheerful refrains took on a weight far greater than his carefree demeanor suggested. His singing was not mimicry, it was kinship with the primal forces that had shaped Arda itself. Yet unlike the Valar, who had taken seats of power, or the Maiar, who bent themselves to purposes of war or governance, Tom's music was without ambition. It did not seek to bend, only to remind. The hobbits heard this most clearly in the quiet moments, when the day's journey slowed and Tom would sing to the river as it flowed. His words were nonsense to their ears, light syllables strung together in lilting rhythm, but the river answered. Its surface quickened, brightening as though touched by dawn, and a low hum seemed to echo beneath its flow. The song was not command but conversation, not rule but recognition. To listen was to realize that the melody did not impose order but revealed it, uncovering the hidden balance already present in stone, water, and leaf. Yet the power of such music was not without tension. For while Tom's songs preserved harmony within his bounds, silence pressed in from without. Beyond his hills and forests, other songs had risen, songs of iron, of fire, of domination. Sauron's will, though spoken seldom, was itself a song, heavy with discord, meant to unmake and remake all in its image. To sing lightly in defiance of such weight was an act of resistance, though Tom never called it so, and this raised the question that lingered in Frodo's mind. Was Tom's music a shield or merely a refuge? Did it hold back the shadow or simply ignore it? One evening, as the fire crackled in his house, Frodo dared to ask. "Your songs," he said softly, "they seem to carry more than mirth. Do they keep the darkness away?" Tom looked at him with eyes both kind and impenetrable, and laughed. "Darkness listens, lad, But it does not belong where Tom's words are strong. Each has its place. Outside, other voices sing their battles. Inside, my voice keeps the hills awake and the waters running. He offered no further answer, no boast of conquest, only the assurance that his music was enough within the circle he called his own. The hobbits pondered this in silence, for they were beginning to see how deeply the land itself was bound by sound. To walk with Tom was to hear the forest murmur in response, to hear stones shift almost imperceptibly when his boots struck the earth. Even the Barrow Downs, places of shadow and old death, had yielded to his command, their wraiths driven back by nothing more than the persistent rhythm of his chanting voice. Where others bore swords and staffs, Tom bore song, and it was stronger than either within his realm. But the mystery deepened with every note. For what, then, was the silence beyond his borders? If song carried creation, then silence carried absence. Outside Tom's circle, silence grew, not empty but heavy, a void waiting to swallow melody. Could silence itself be a kind of power, one even Tom did not breach? Frodo could not know, but the thought unsettled him. If Tom was master within his boundaries through song, then perhaps the silence outside was a master greater still, a reminder that all harmony ends at its edge. And yet the hobbits also found comfort in this mystery. They had been rescued not by violence but by music, by words that seemed foolish on the surface, yet carried weight enough to shift the will of tree and stone. It showed them that power need not always roar to be real. Sometimes it hummed quietly, sometimes it laughed, sometimes it echoed like a child's rhyme and yet shook the ground beneath. It was a revelation that left them both grateful and restless, for if such a power could exist, why was it not carried into the battles that loomed over Middle-earth? Why was it content to remain hidden in the folds of forest and river? The answer was not given, only implied in the quiet turning of the seasons around Tom's house, in Goldberry's serene smile, in the endless stream that flowed past their door. To sing was to live, not to conquer, and to live was enough. Yet Frodo could not shake the feeling that such a philosophy, however beautiful, bore within it a shadow of peril. For if the world itself was being remade by darker songs, could any corner truly remain untouched? The hobbits left that night's fire with Tom's voice still in their ears, the notes trailing into their dreams. They dreamed of rivers that sang, of hills that answered, of trees that bent their branches not to capture but to dance in rhythm. And beneath it all was the quiet refrain, that mastery could exist without conquest, that power could move without violence, that song itself might be the oldest law. Yet even in their dreams, silence pressed at the edges, a silence waiting to remind them that every melody has its limit. The morning mist lay thick across the land when Tom led them toward the rolling downs. Here the hills rose in quiet undulations, pale with grass, crowned with stones that stood like watchmen of another age. The hobbits felt unease almost at once, for the air carried a stillness unlike the living hush of the forest. It was the silence of waiting, heavy with memories that clung to the soil. Tom walked ahead cheerfully, singing as he went, but his voice carried a new gravity, as though even his light-hearted refrains must labor harder to keep these shadows at bay. The Barrow Downs were a place of burial, where kings of forgotten tribes had been laid beneath the earth. Their mounds dotted the horizon, swelling like waves turned to stone. The hobbits, who had known little of such places in the Shire, felt a prickling at the back of their necks as they passed among them. The very air seemed to breathe of old sorrow, of battles lost and crowns turned to dust. Even the sunlight, pale and weak through the fog, appeared reluctant to rest upon the barrows, as though it too feared to disturb what lay beneath. It was in this haunted place that the hobbits strayed. Tom had gone on before, his figure swallowed by mist, and they, lingering and uncertain, wandered too close to one of the great mounds. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift, and suddenly they were drawn inside, swallowed by an unseen door. Darkness closed around them, and the chill of the grave wrapped itself upon their skin. Within they felt the presence of a power, unlike Old Man Willow's malice, a presence older, colder, more relentless. The Barrow-wight had claimed them. They awoke to find themselves laid upon a cold stone slab, dressed in strange garments of pale cloth, crowns of gold set upon their heads. Around them glimmered treasure, blades, rings, and ornaments from forgotten kings. But these were not gifts. They were bindings, tokens of a power that sought to claim them for death. A low voice murmured in the darkness, chanting words that carried no warmth. The wight moved unseen, its presence pressing upon their hearts with suffocating weight. Fear froze them, and hope seemed extinguished. Yet Frodo, though trembling, remembered Tom's words and his songs. With effort he raised his voice into the dark, calling out with the lines Tom had given them. "Ho! Tom Bombadil! Tom Bombadillo! By water, wood, and hill, by reed and willow." The words rang strangely against the cold stone, but they carried farther than Frodo expected, as though the very earth bore them outward. The silence that followed was pierced by a sudden burst of melody, bright and strong, cutting through the wight's gloom like a shaft of light. Tom came, striding into the barrow as though he were entering his own home. His boots rang against the stone, his feathered hat gleamed even in the dimness, and his song drove back the chill. He spoke to the darkness, scolding it as one would a stubborn beast, and his laughter rang in the corners where shadows tried to cling. The wight gave no voice of protest, but the presence retreated, its grip loosening as Tom's words pressed against it. With a command both stern and playful, he shattered the enchantment. The hobbits were freed, the crowns cast aside, the treasure stripped of its power. Then Tom's voice grew firm, deeper than they had ever heard it, as he addressed the very earth. He banished the wight, sending it back into silence, and called the mound to rest again in peace. The air seemed to sigh, and the oppressive weight lifted. The hobbits staggered into the daylight, blinking at the sudden brightness. The mist still lay heavy, but the suffocating dread was gone. Tom stood beside them, smiling, though his eyes carried a glint of knowledge far older than their own fears. The hobbits marveled, but unease lingered, for though Tom's laughter made light of the wight's defeat, they had seen the barrow's strength firsthand. They had felt how swiftly despair could bind them, how close death lay in the soil of Middle-earth, and yet Tom had dispersed it as though it were no more than an unwelcome shadow. To him there was no struggle. The wight had no power in his presence. This raised again the question they dared not ask. How could such might remain confined to hills and forests when the world beyond cried out for aid? Frodo studied him quietly as they walked. Tom hummed as though nothing had occurred, gathering flowers for Goldberry as if their brush with death had been no more than a passing inconvenience. To the hobbits, this was deliverance. To Tom, it seemed an interruption scarcely worth remembering, and yet in his simplicity lay a truth the hobbits could not ignore. Tom did not fight the darkness because for him it carried no threat. He was not at war with it, for war implied equality of force. Within his realm, evil was as powerless as silence before song. But what of beyond? That question haunted Frodo's thoughts. The Barrow-wight had been scattered, but only here, only by Tom's presence. Elsewhere, other shadows gathered strength. If Tom's mastery ended at the borders of his land, then beyond those bounds the wights of the world would not tremble. They would rise, unchecked. The hobbits felt both gratitude and sorrow in this realization. Gratitude for their rescue had been complete and unlooked for. Sorrow for the power that saved them seemed destined never to touch the greater battles of their age. Tom, seeing their unease, smiled gently. "Rest now," he said. "The hills remember their peace. Let the world outside remember its own." His words soothed but did not resolve. For the hobbits, the barrow's chill would not soon be forgotten. They had glimpsed the nearness of death, the weight of ancient shadows, and they had seen one man scatter it with song. Yet they carried with them the troubling knowledge that his strength would remain here, bound to these downs and these forests, content to let the wider world find its fate. As they left the Barrow Downs behind, Frodo looked once more at the silent mounds. They seemed harmless now, lying in pale sunlight, the mist dissolving. Yet he knew what lay within, that silence could become voice, that shadow could rise, that treasures buried in earth could become chains upon the living. And he knew too that Tom's laughter, though stronger than all of it, would never be carried far enough to silence the greater shadows. The rescue was complete, but the riddle only deepened. If darkness pressed harder, beyond barrow and hill, what would even Tom's song be worth? The memory of the barrow lingered even as the hobbits pressed onward, but in Tom's presence their spirits had been lifted. Yet a greater test of his nature awaited, one that touched not upon shadows of the earth, but upon the very fulcrum of the age. For within the house of Bombadil, with fire crackling and Goldberry's song drifting like water through the air, Frodo at last revealed the burden he carried. The ring heavy upon its chain had been their secret companion, a weight not only upon Frodo's breast, but upon their hearts. When Tom asked of their errand, with eyes as bright and innocent as a child's, Frodo hesitated, then slowly brought forth the small golden circle that gleamed with an allure both terrible and alluring. The ring seemed to shimmer more fiercely in that room, as though even here, in a place untouched by time's shadow, it sought to make itself known. The hobbits watched closely, fearing what power it might exert upon their host, for in every tale they had heard, the ring corrupted, ensnared, or tempted. Kings had fallen, wizards had turned, men had betrayed all they loved for its promise. Surely even Tom Bombadil could not be immune to such malice, yet he did not shrink nor tremble. Instead, he laughed, a full, round laugh that shook the rafters and startled the hobbits. With a twinkle in his eye, he took the ring between finger and thumb, as one might hold a trinket plucked from the riverbed. Then came the moment that defied every expectation. He placed the ring upon his finger, and nothing changed. His form remained visible, his voice rang clearly, his laughter filled the room. There was no vanishing into shadow, no ripple in the air, no distortion of presence. The hobbits gasped aloud, for to them this was impossible. To wear the ring was to disappear, to enter the half-world of unseen things. But Tom wore it as though it were no more than a bead of polished gold. He twirled it lightly, tossed it once in the air, and with a smile that bore no trace of greed or awe, flicked it toward Frodo, who caught it with trembling hands. The ring seemed smaller now, almost trivial in the wake of Tom's indifference. The hobbits looked from one to another, astonished, whispering among themselves. What did it mean that such a power had no hold upon him? Was it proof of a strength greater than any known in Middle-earth, or of a difference so fundamental that the ring's malice simply could not touch him? They had no answer, and Tom offered none. He only sang a light tune as if to dismiss the matter entirely, and spoke of other things. But Frodo could not let the moment pass untested. That night, as Tom's voice echoed faintly in another room, Frodo held the ring once more. A shadow of doubt crept over him, the suspicion that perhaps Tom's laughter was itself a mask. Quietly, He slipped the ring upon his own finger. At once the world shifted, the familiar fading of sight, the vanishing from his companion's eyes. Yet when Frodo, invisible, tried to move silently across the room, Tom turned at once and fixed him with a knowing smile. "Come now, lad," he said, as though he had never lost sight of him. Frodo froze, startled that the ring's veil had not deceived Tom's eyes. Bombadil reached out gently, plucked the ring away, and placed it back in Frodo's palm without reproach. His eyes shone not with judgment but with kindness, as though to say the test had been expected. For the hobbits, this encounter unsettled more than it soothed. If Tom was immune to the ring's lure, why should he not be entrusted with it? Why not let him bear the burden, keep it safe within his bounded land, where no shadow seemed able to touch him? Was he not the answer to the struggle that weighed upon them all? Yet even as the thought rose, doubts grew alongside it. Tom had shown no desire to possess the ring, no recognition of its wider threat, no inclination to leave his circle of hills and forest. Would he guard it faithfully, or would he simply forget it, cast it aside as a trinket, while the world beyond burned? It was a paradox that pierced them deeply. Tom's immunity was not triumph, but detachment. He could not be corrupted because he was not invested. He had no hunger for power, no fear of loss, no ambition to resist. He stood outside the game altogether, and thus the ring had no purchase on him. But in standing outside, he could not play a role in the struggle that consumed elves, men, and hobbits alike. To give him the ring would be to remove it from the contest, yes, but also to risk that it would be forgotten until the world itself was swept away. Frodo turned the thought over long into the night, staring at the small golden band upon its chain. Tom's laughter had made it seem small, but the weight upon Frodo's chest reminded him it was not. The ring had undone kings, corrupted wizards, swallowed realms, and driven entire peoples to despair. If one man, one being, could treat it as nothing, then he was either the greatest hope or the most dangerous irrelevance. That ambiguity lingered like a shadow at the edge of firelight. Tom offered no resolution, no clear declaration of what his indifference meant. In the morning, he spoke of weather, of rivers, of the gathering of lilies, as though the ring were not the hinge upon which the fate of Middle-earth turned. The hobbits said nothing, but in their hearts the question gnawed. If Tom Bombadil could wear the ring and remain untouched, then what, truly, was he? A guardian beyond corruption, or a figure so detached from destiny that he was beyond both hope and peril? The silence of the night before still lingered in Frodo's ears as he prepared to depart. Tom's house was a place of refuge, but the world outside was calling, heavy with tasks and perils. And in the contrast between Bombadil's indifference and the burden Frodo carried, the riddle of the ring only deepened. The golden circle lay against his chest once more, heavier than ever, and though Tom had treated it as a plaything, Frodo knew the shadow it cast across the world could not be dismissed. If Tom was the riddle that bewildered them, then Goldberry was the answer that never sought to explain. She moved through the house with the quiet assurance of flowing water, her presence both luminous and grounded, as if she belonged equally to the hearth and the riverbed. The hobbits, who had known her first through song before they beheld her face, felt the truth of her name at once. She was the river daughter, and in her glance shimmered the reflections of reeds, lilies, and endless currents. When she spoke, it was with the cadence of water over stone, gentle, patient, yet carrying its own authority. She welcomed them not as strangers, but as guests long awaited. While Tom sang and laughed, Goldberry's silence was equally eloquent. She listened to their tales with a stillness that drew words out more easily than any question. When she did speak, her words carried the calm weight of the river itself, flowing, unhurried, certain of their course. To Frodo she seemed no less a mystery than Tom, but of another kind. Tom baffled by his boundless cheer, his detachment from all cares. Goldberry, however, steadied him. She gave shape to his mirth, anchoring it within the rhythm of seasons and the turning of waters. If Tom claimed to be eldest, then Goldberry seemed timeless in another fashion, the embodiment of place rather than of age. The river was her voice, the lilies her adornment, the rains her laughter. When she prepared their meal, even the simplest act of pouring water into cups seemed ritual, as though she were renewing a covenant between earth and those who walked upon it. The hobbits, unused to such presences, felt a reverence that bordered on awe. Here was no queen, no lady of realms, yet her household bore the dignity of a court older than memory. It was in Goldberry's presence that Frodo glimpsed the cost of Tom's timeless detachment. For Tom, unconcerned with the world's fate, was not alone. He had Goldberry. Through her, his solitude became companionship. His mirth became home rather than wandering. Her presence showed that Tom's existence, unanchored though it seemed, was bound by love. The hobbits saw it in the way Tom's eyes softened when she entered the room, in the way his songs brightened when she smiled. Without her, his laughter might have been only a riddle echoing in empty woods. With her, it became part of a harmony, a circle complete in itself. Goldberry spoke of the passing seasons with gentle certainty. She told them that autumn was not the death of summer, but its gift, that winter was not absence but a waiting, and that spring was always promised, though never hurried. In her words the hobbits heard a wisdom unlike Tom's riddles. His power lay in joy that disregarded all burdens. Hers lay in patience that embraced them. She did not dismiss the world's struggles, but seemed to enfold them within a larger rhythm. Even sorrow, she hinted, was part of the song of waters, a depth that made the surface shine more brightly. Sam, most of all, was moved by her presence. To him she was not only mystery, but memory, a reflection of the streams and gardens of the Shire. He saw in her the promise that beauty could endure without ownership, that care could be given without possession. Goldberry spoke gently to him of the earth's patience, of planting and harvest, and Sam felt his own heart mirrored in her words. She seemed to understand his love for simple growing things, and in that understanding lay a bond deeper than words. For Frodo, however, Goldberry raised another question. If Tom was unconcerned with power, Goldberry seemed equally untroubled by its absence. She did not seek to persuade him, nor to explain Tom's mysteries. She simply was. Her serenity did not banish the riddle, but made it bearable. Frodo sensed that without her, Tom's detachment might appear cold, even dangerous. With her it became tempered by affection, woven into a household of belonging. She was the reason his circle did not dissolve into isolation. She bound him to time, not through ambition, but through love. And yet even here, the hobbits could not shake the thought of what was unfolding beyond. The world of Goldberry's river was whole, serene, and enduring. But it was a world set apart. The ring still pressed upon Frodo's chest, reminding him of the storm gathering in the east. Goldberry did not deny it, but neither did she speak of it. To her the task belonged to others. She blessed their journey, but she did not call Tom to join it. In her calm was both solace and sorrow, for the hobbits realized that even love, even companionship, could not compel Bombadil to step beyond his chosen borders. Still, they left her presence with lighter hearts. She placed lilies in their hands, tokens of the river's blessing, and her smile lingered in their memory like sunlight upon water. They felt they had glimpsed a truth too gentle to be carried into battle, yet too profound to be forgotten. Goldberry was not power in the sense of kings or warriors. She was endurance, the quiet persistence of water shaping stone, the renewal that followed every winter. Through her they understood Tom not as solitary but as complete, bound in covenant to life's quieter rhythms. Yet Frodo, as he looked back upon the house, knew the paradox remained unresolved. For if Tom's indifference was softened by Goldberry's love, the question still stood: what was the cost of their contentment? To dwell apart untouched was a blessing within their circle, but for the world beyond, struggling under shadow, it was absence. As the hobbits shouldered their packs once more, Frodo's heart carried both gratitude and unease. They had seen what harmony looked like, but they could not shake the thought that such harmony, however beautiful, had chosen not to join the wider battle. When the Council of Elrond gathered in Rivendell, the hobbits listened with hushed hearts as voices of great power debated the fate of the ring. Elves, men, dwarves, and a wizard all spoke of war and ruin, of shadows rising and kingdoms trembling. Each weighed the cost of action and the terror of inaction, and the ring lying on the table seemed to gleam with a will of its own, listening, waiting. In that gathering of the wise where every word carried the weight of history, Tom Bombadil's name was spoken aloud, and with it came a silence heavier than iron. Eristor, Councillor of Elrond, raised the thought first. Why not give the ring to Bombadil? Was he not beyond its corruption? Had not even the whispers of the wise admitted that he regarded the ring as nothing more than a plaything? If he could wear it and remain unchanged, then surely in his keeping it would be safe. Perhaps the one place where it could not betray its bearer was in the hands of the one who cared nothing for its promises. Murmurs rose. The suggestion had a surface of reason, for none could deny the peculiar witness of the hobbits. They had seen Tom's indifference, his laughter in the face of its malice, his ability to treat it as less than a trinket. In the eyes of men and elves alike, this seemed a strength unlike any other. For who else could claim such freedom from the ring's whisper? Yet Elrond himself, wise and ancient, shook his head slowly, and Gandalf's face grew grey. Gandalf spoke with care, as if each word carried the memory of ages. To him it is no more than a toy. If he were given the ring, he might forget it, or he might set it aside, for it has no hold upon him. And therein lies the peril. For if Sauron's hand should stretch far enough, if his darkness should grow deep enough, then even Bombadil's house would not remain untouched. He would not comprehend the need to defend the ring, nor to guard it with vigilance. He would let it slip into shadow, not through betrayal, but through disregard. This was the heart of the dismissal. Tom's immunity was not strength in the sense of kings, nor discipline in the sense of warriors. It was detachment. He stood outside the struggle, and therefore he could not bear its burden. The council understood, then, that to entrust the fate of the world to one who cared nothing for its fate was to gamble everything on indifference. Bombadil might endure when all else fell, but endurance was not salvation. His neutrality was his blessing and his doom. The hobbits sat in silence, torn between awe and sorrow. They had seen Tom's laughter scatter shadows, his songs turn dread into play. They had thought, if only for a moment, that he might be the answer to the riddle of the ring. Yet here, among the wise, the truth revealed itself differently. What seemed immunity was also incapacity. Tom could not be corrupted, but neither could he be compelled. He would not bend to the ring, but he would not bear the weight of the world either. In his hands, the ring would cease to matter, and in ceasing, it would slip into ruin. For Frodo, the revelation was piercing. He had watched Tom dismiss the ring as a bauble, had seen him toss it lightly and laugh. He had felt both relief and unease in that gesture. Now he understood the deeper truth. Tom's world was not the world of Elrond or Gandalf or Aragorn. It was not the world of kingdoms or war. It was a circle bounded by forest, river, and hill, content within itself, untouched by fate. To entrust him with the ring would be to entrust it to silence, to remove it from the struggle, not to resolve it. Aragorn spoke then, his voice carrying the weight of men who had endured decline. In the end it must be destroyed, to hide it, to cast it aside, to place it with one who will not guard it. All these are but delays. Sauron will rise, and his gaze will reach even to Bombadil's land. He cannot withstand the eye forever, not because he will bend, but because he will not resist. He does not fight wars. He does not claim dominion. He does not enter the tale of kings and ruin. Thus the council moved past the thought, though not without a lingering shadow of wonder, for the suggestion had revealed the paradox more clearly than before. Tom Bombadil was both the safest and the most perilous guardian. To him the ring was nothing, and because it was nothing, it would be lost. His very freedom from its power made him powerless to protect it. His refusal to join the world's battles made him unable to end them. The hobbits carried this conclusion heavily. They had seen the brilliance of Tom's immunity, and now they saw its emptiness. He was no ally in the Great War, no foe of Sauron, no savior of realms. He was himself alone, content in his circle, unshaken by shadow. And so, though he had saved them in their hour of need, his part in the story was over before it had truly begun. He would remain while others marched to doom or glory. As the council drew its long debate toward resolution, Frodo's thoughts turned inward. Tom's laughter still echoed in his mind, his bright boots striding through forest and barrow alike. How could such a being, so ancient and untroubled, be left aside as irrelevant? Was it not strange that Middle-earth's greatest mystery had no place in its greatest struggle? Frodo felt the answer like a weight of silence. Tom was not meant for crowns or battles. He was meant to remind them that some things remain beyond the grasp of power. He was meant to show that not all must be claimed, not all must be wielded, not all must be explained. Yet even in that reminder, the unease did not vanish, for the council knew that Middle-earth could not rest upon riddles. Decisions demanded action. The ring could not be dismissed. It must be carried, suffered, and unmade. Bombadil could not walk that path, for his song was of another rhythm entirely. He would endure if all else perished, but endurance without struggle was no victory. And so the council turned its eyes away from him, back to the perilous road that lay before them. Still, as the hobbits left the chamber that night, Frodo whispered to himself the question that none had answered. If Bombadil could not be corrupted, what lesson was hidden in his indifference? Perhaps the world needed one such as he, not to fight, but to remind them that even the deepest shadow could not swallow every song. Yet the price of such a reminder was absence, and absence was heavy in an age that demanded action. Long after the council had dismissed his name, Tom Bombadil remained in the thoughts of those who had heard it spoken. His figure stood apart from every other, as though Middle-earth itself had conspired to carve out a space of mystery that even the wisest could not bridge. And so, beyond the songs of hobbits and the counsels of elves, there grew among readers and listeners a field of speculation, an endless weaving of interpretations that sought to name what he truly was. For Tom could not be left alone in silence. He demanded an answer even as he refused one. Some said he was the spirit of the vanishing countryside, the memory of meadows and woodlands that once spread without boundary, unscarred by road or forge. In him lived the echo of England's own green fields, a figure woven from hedgerows and streams, from the laughter of water and the patience of ancient oaks. To them, Bombadil was no character of power, but of remembrance, Tolkien's homage to a world slipping quietly into shadow with the march of modernity. In this vision, he was not so much a being as a symbol, an anchor of nostalgia against the ceaseless tide of history. Others placed him among the Valar, though he bore no crown or throne. Could he be Alia or Arama in disguise, wandering in plain garb, caring not for recognition? Yet the Valar were bound to mandates, and Tom held none. His detachment did not fit their roles, for they shaped and guarded the world with purpose, while he remained unbound by any task. If he was of their number, then he was a contradiction, a Valar who had abandoned his charge, content to dwell in solitude while the world labored. That thought unsettled, for it implied dereliction rather than mystery. Still others whispered that he was older even than the Aenir, some remnant of the music's first breath, a fragment of creation unshaped by discord or design. If that were so, he was not subject to fate as others were. He was the world before story, the silence before song, or perhaps the note that remained untouched when all else bent and broke. This vision held a strange power, for it explained both his immunity to the ring and his refusal to enter the great wars. If he was of the beginning, then he belonged not to the tale of ends. And yet there were those who thought him no more than a jest, a puzzle deliberately placed by Tolkien to resist unraveling. Did the professor not admit in his letters that Bombadil was a kind of invention apart, a figure who wandered into the tale from another imagination and could not be made to fit? Some scholars saw in him a challenge to readers, a reminder that myth need not always resolve into order. He was the unanswerable riddle the doorway left ajar in a house of perfect design. If so, his meaning was not in his nature, but in his refusal to yield it. Each interpretation revealed as much of the seeker as of Bombadil. To the nostalgic, he was the countryside fading into smoke. To the theologian, he was a god misplaced. To the metaphysician, he was the primeval note. To the skeptic, he was a puzzle box deliberately unsolved. And in this endless debate, Tom grew larger in absence, his silence shaping more conversation than his words ever had. He became a mirror into which all gazed, seeing their own longings reflected back. The hobbits, who had known him not as symbol but as friend, would have smiled at these debates, for to them he was neither Valar nor metaphor, neither enigma nor jest. He was the man who sang them free from the willow, who laughed in the face of shadows, who poured them drink in his house while Goldberry set the table. He was both more ordinary and more wondrous than any theory could hold, and perhaps that was his truest mystery, that he was real enough to rescue and host them, yet vast enough to confound the wisest minds for generations. For Frodo, the interpretations he later heard did not lessen the riddle. If Tom was memory, then why did the ring not touch him? If he was Valar, then why no mandate? If he was older than the music, then why bounded by hills and rivers? None of these answers closed the circle, and perhaps none were meant to. Tom's nature resisted reduction because he was not meant to be solved. His presence was a reminder that Middle-earth itself contained corners unmeasured, mysteries that no law could bind. Yet this very refusal raised a cost, for in leaving Bombadil undefined, Tolkien placed him outside the central weave of story. Readers might ponder, but the characters moved on. The council set him aside, and the War of the Ring unfolded without him. In the silence of omission lay a truth more profound than any theory. Not every power must join the struggle. Not every figure must take a side. Some endure by absence, and absence itself becomes their gift. Still, unease lingered. If Bombadil was a riddle never to be solved, what lesson did that teach? Was it that mystery must remain in every myth, that the world is richer for what it cannot explain? Or was it that some powers, however strange, choose to stand apart, and in that choice lies both wisdom and peril? The debates did not end, nor will they end, for Tom's indifference left a silence into which endless voices would speak. And so, the interpretations became their own kind of song, a chorus of attempts to name the unnameable. Yet each note circled back to the same stillness, the same laughter in the forest, the same bright boots striding across grass. Tom remained Tom, unchanged by speculation, untouched by theories, as immune to scholarly pursuit as he was to the ring itself. His meaning was not in resolution, but in persistence, in the fact that he continued to puzzle and delight across every telling. For Frodo, who remembered him not as symbol, but as presence, the truth was quieter still. Tom Bombadil was mystery made flesh, but also hospitality, laughter, and song, and perhaps the lesson was that mystery need not always be dark nor dangerous. Some mysteries lighten the heart, even as they resist the mind. Yet even in that gentleness, Frodo carried forward the question that none could set aside. If such a being walked the world and cared nothing for power, what then was the measure of all those who did? Tom Bombadil's place in the story of the ring was brief, yet the mark he left upon it was unlike any other, for in a tale that surged forward with urgency, where every step pressed closer to peril and every voice trembled with dread of the Dark Lord's shadow, Tom stood apart as an interlude of brightness and peace. His chapters unfolded not with the clang of swords, nor the whispers of treachery, but with laughter, song, and the warmth of hearth and table. To some he seemed a digression, a detour in a tale of war. Yet to those who remembered him he was not absence but perspective, a reminder that the world contained more than struggle, and that even in the darkest age there were corners where joy endured untouched. Narratively, his presence was jarring. The hobbits, trembling from the old forest and the near death of the Barrow, found in him not merely salvation but a pause. In his house they ate, rested, and dreamed without fear, as though the burden of the ring were lifted for a season. He showed them that the world was more than the long shadow cast by Mordor, that beauty and love could exist apart from destiny. In that sense he was a disruption not of story but of expectation. He offered a moment of reprieve in a narrative otherwise bound to urgency. Yet his disappearance from the tale after that brief span seemed deliberate, a vanishing as mysterious as his first arrival. For the reader, this departure carried its own disquiet. Why introduce such a figure, so full of power and enigma, only to let him fade into the background? Why plant a riddle at the very heart of the story's beginning, only to refuse resolution at its end? The answer, perhaps, lies in his function. Tom was not there to be explained. He was there to reframe. He altered the way the hobbits, and through them the reader, understood the journey. For after Tom, they could never again believe that the ring was absolute. They had seen one for whom it meant nothing, and so, even when its burden grew heavy, the possibility remained that power could be defied, not by strength but by disregard. Yet this same function carried with it a paradox. Tom was both essential and irrelevant. Essential because his immunity to the ring proved that its dominion was not absolute. Irrelevant because he refused to join the struggle. His narrative outlier status mirrored his metaphysical one. He stood apart from the pattern, immune yet detached, central yet absent. Tolkien's design placed him at the edge of the tale, brushing against its heart, but refusing to be drawn inward. In this way, Bombadil revealed something about the story itself, that not all mysteries serve the plot. Some exist to deepen the world. The hobbits, though, did not experience him as a literary device. To them, he was a man of laughter and song who had saved their lives. His absence in the later tale did not erase his presence. It lingered in their memory, a touchstone of brightness when the road grew dark. Frodo, especially, carried it with him. When the ring weighed heavily upon his spirit, when Mordor's shadow pressed close, he sometimes thought of Tom tossing the ring in the air, as though it were nothing at all. That vision did not free him, but it reminded him that the ring's claim was not universal, that its dominion was not unbreakable. Tom's absence was itself a kind of presence, a memory that offered perspective even when he was far away. But here too lay a quiet cost, for though Tom reframed the tale, his detachment also underscored its burden. He could not carry the ring, nor would he. He could not march to Mordor, nor would he. He could not save kingdoms, nor would he. His refusal was not cruel, but complete, a statement that he belonged to another order of being. The hobbits were left to wonder what it meant that such a being existed, but chose absence. Did it show that salvation must be earned by those who struggled, not gifted by those who stood apart? Or did it reveal that even in a world of peril, some powers simply refuse to play the game? The narrative weight of Bombadil's disappearance is often felt more keenly than his presence. Readers remember him not because he solved the riddle of the ring, but because he refused to. He lingers in absence, haunting the story with what might have been. His house in the old forest becomes a ghostly space in memory, a place the characters never return to but always recall. In this way, Bombadil embodies the theme of loss in another register, not the loss of life or power, but the loss of explanation. He is the unanswered question, the chapter that cannot be revisited, and yet his brief presence is precisely what grants the tale its fullness. Without Bombadil, the ring might appear as an inescapable absolute. With him it is revealed to be contingent, a thing of power but not of universality. With him it is revealed to be contingent, a thing of power but not of universality. Without Bombadil, the tale would flow relentlessly toward doom. With him it pauses, breathes, and remembers that joy exists beyond the shadow. His narrative outlier role thus becomes indispensable, not for what he does, but for what he shows, that the world is larger than the story told, that mystery persists even where explanation falters. For Frodo and his companions, this truth ripened as they moved further from his circle. They realized, often unconsciously, that their vision of the world had been widened. They carried not only the burden of the ring, but also the memory of Bombadil's laughter, of Goldberry's song, of lilies floating on the river. And in that memory lay a balance. They could endure more because they had glimpsed a world where endurance was not required, where joy flowed freely, unburdened by shadow. Bombadil's absence thus shaped their journey, as surely as his presence had saved them. In the end, the paradox remained, a character both central and peripheral, both indispensable and irrelevant, both mystery and comfort. He vanished from the tale, yet his absence was louder than many presences, for he stood as a reminder that no story, however vast, can claim to encompass all. There must always remain corners unexplained, riddles unanswered, presences unaccounted for. Bombadil was that corner, that riddle, that presence. And so, though he disappeared from the road to Mordor, he never disappeared from the hearts of those who walked it. The War of the Ring passed like a storm over Middle-earth, scattering kingdoms, breaking towers, and bringing both despair and triumph. Yet through all the thunder of armies and the cries of ruined lands, Tom Bombadil remained in his house by the Withywindle, untouched. The hobbits, who endured the weight of Mordor's shadow and walked into the heart of its fire, never forgot him, though they never saw him again. And when the ring was at last unmade, when Sauron fell and his great works crumbled into dust, Tom still lingered in his bright circle, as though none of it had touched him. His fields were green, his songs unbroken, and Goldberry still gathered lilies by the river. To the world it seemed as if he had no aftermath, no chapter of consequence. But in that very endurance lay his most haunting riddle. For all others, the end of the ring was both victory and loss. Gondor was renewed, yet its king bore the scars of long struggle. The elves prepared for their departure, their beauty fading like autumn light. Even the hobbits, though they returned home, carried wounds that never wholly healed. The cost of the ring was written upon every land and every heart. Yet Tom bore no cost. He had held the ring in his hand and laughed, had slipped it upon his finger, and remained visible, had cast it aside as though it were nothing, and when its distraction shook the very foundations of the world, he stood unmoved. This lack of consequence was as mysterious as his immunity, for how could a being within Middle-earth remain so utterly apart from its wounds? The hobbits pondered this in later years, Frodo especially, as he felt the ache of wounds that never closed, thought often of Tom. What must it be like to live in a world scarred by war yet untouched by it? Was it blessing or exile? Was Bombadil's joy the purest gift? Or was it bought at the price of detachment so deep that he could not suffer with others, nor be marked by their trials? Frodo could not say, but the question gnawed at him in his quiet hours. Tom remained a comfort and a sorrow both, a reminder that while some endured pain, others remained forever unscarred. The land itself seemed to remember differently. In the Shire, the seasons passed with familiar rhythm, yet the hobbits felt the world older, warier, and thinner in its joy. In Gondor, ruins stood beside new walls, each a testament to both resilience and cost. Across Rohan, the fields were littered with memories of battle, even as they bloomed with grass. The world bore its aftermath visibly, scar upon scar. But in Bombadil's country, the rivers sang as they always had, the hills rolled in quiet beauty, and the lilies floated unchanged upon the stream. For his realm was not aftermath but continuance, untouched by the tides of history. To many that seemed peace beyond measure, yet to others it seemed estrangement, as though his land was no longer part of the same world. Scholars wondered if he had felt the destruction at all. Did the unmaking of the ring pass by him like a storm beyond the horizon, heard faintly but not feared? Did the collapse of Barad-dûr echo in his ears, or was it only another season turning, of no greater weight than a summer storm rolling over hills? Perhaps he had smiled at the trembling of the earth and sung louder, his boots stamping in joy, caring not for what was lost, only for what remained. Or perhaps he had not noticed at all. This possibility unsettled many. To imagine a being so free that even the greatest victory and the greatest loss of the age passed unheeded was to confront a kind of indifference beyond comprehension. For Frodo, the memory of Bombadil remained tied to a sense of what might have been, if such a being could exist, immune to shadow. Why could he not save others from its reach? Why had he remained apart? The question echoed louder after the ring's destruction. For them the contrast was stark. The world had bled and broken. Tom had not. The dissonance of this truth weighed heavily on Frodo's heart. He wondered if perhaps Tom was not a lesson in power at all, but a lesson in mystery, that some things endure without explanation, not to provide solutions, but to remind others that solutions do not encompass all truths. In the Shire, as Frodo sat by the fire or walked along quiet paths, he sometimes hummed fragments of Bombadil's songs, though the words slipped from memory like water through fingers. They comforted him, yet also ached, for they reminded him of a presence that had not carried the same burdens. He envied Tom's freedom, yet could not rest in it, for he bore wounds that Tom never knew, and in that difference lay an unbridgeable distance. The ring was gone, yet its shadow remained in scars and dreams. Only Bombadil had neither shadow nor scar. And so, in the tale of Middle-earth, Bombadil became the figure of the forgotten aftermath. He endured when all else changed. He remained when all else was marked. His presence was not altered by the war, nor by its victories, nor by its ruins. To some that was a mercy, proof that joy could persist unbroken in at least one corner of the world. To others it was a sorrow, proof that even in the greatest struggles, some powers would never join, never bend, never bleed. In that paradox lay his final gift and his final silence. Thus the world moved on without him. Kings ruled, elves departed, hobbits grew old, and men built their cities anew. But Tom still sang in his house, his boots bright, his laughter echoing in the trees. He was a reminder that history does not claim all, that some notes of the great music remain untouched by discord, ringing as they first rang at the dawn of time. And yet, for those who carried wounds, his song was both comfort and sting, a melody of peace that they could hear but never wholly share. Neutrality is often spoken of as a choice, a position taken in the midst of conflict, but with Tom Bombadil it seemed less a decision than a condition of being. He did not weigh alliances nor deliberate on causes. He simply stood outside them, immune not only to the lures of power, but also to its demands. The council had dismissed him for this reason, calling him unreliable not because he might betray, but because he would not participate. Yet to others, his detachment offered hope, for if such a being could exist, unbent by shadow, then perhaps evil was not the total order of things. Perhaps even at the height of Sauron's might, there would remain pockets of creation unbroken, harmonies still pure. Tom's indifference, while useless in war, was proof that the ring did not define all reality. This realization, quiet and easily overlooked, mattered deeply. In him was the sign that corruption was not universal, that not everything could be claimed. Even in an age of fire and ruin, there was still a corner of the world singing songs of laughter. But neutrality is not without cost. To stand outside the struggle is to refuse its victories as well as its defeats. Tom's joy was real, but it was bounded. He did not share in the triumph of the ring's unmaking. He did not share in the grief of those who bore scars. He remained apart, untouched and untouching. In this way, his immunity was also exile. To be beyond power was to be beyond solidarity, beyond the shared burden that knit the free peoples together. Tom had no place at coronation or at farewell. His neutrality was a fortress as much as a sanctuary, and its walls, though invisible, were unscalable. This paradox gnawed at those who reflected on him. Was neutrality a kind of higher wisdom, or was it abdication? Did Bombadil embody freedom, or did he embody refusal? For Gandalf the matter was clear. He could not be relied upon. For Frodo it was never so simple. Frodo carried the ring and felt its poison, but he also carried memory of Tom's songs, songs that made the world seem whole again. The very neutrality that excluded Tom from the struggle also made him a symbol of what they fought for. A world where laughter, love, and river song might persist without fear. Thus he was both absence and goal, both exile and ideal. Neutrality also exposed the smallness of power itself. For kings and lords, victory was everything. For Bombadil, it was nothing. In his world, the ring was no more than a piece of gold, no heavier than a coin in the pocket. To him, the wars of elves and men were like storms beyond the horizon, passing and returning without altering the flow of his river. He did not need to defeat Shadow, for Shadow had no dominion over him, and this truth carried a hidden lesson. Perhaps the greatest resistance to evil is not to fight it, but to live as though it cannot touch you. Yet such resistance, if resistance it can be called, is useless to those already ensnared. It is the dream of innocence in a world of ruin, a song unheard in the clamor of war. The hobbits felt this tension most deeply. They loved him, and they trusted him, but they could not carry his neutrality into Mordor. Frodo bore scars, Sam carried grief, Merry and Pippin shouldered memory of battle. Their lives were marked, but Tom's remained unmarked. And so, in later years, when they remembered him, it was with mingled affection and distance. He was not theirs, not truly. He had saved them once, but he did not walk their road. His neutrality was his own, unshared and unshareable. They could admire it, even cherish its memory, but they could not join it. And yet, even in his separation, Bombadil's neutrality became part of the tale's meaning. For what is myth without mystery, and what is struggle without reminder of what lies beyond it? He embodied the idea that not every thread is woven into the tapestry of war, that some things remain deliberately outside. His neutrality was the space left open, the silence in the music, the unbroken ground amid ruin. Without him, the story might feel whole, but it would be flatter, more confined. With him, it became larger, deeper, more unsettling. For in his refusal to take sides, Bombadil forced the question of what sides mean. To some, he was a warning that neutrality, however radiant, does not save. To others, he was a promise that even in ages of darkness, light can exist that is not earned, not defended, not paid for in blood. He was at once irrelevant and essential, powerless and unassailable. His neutrality meant that he would never be hero nor villain, but it also meant that he would endure beyond both, singing his songs when kingdoms had crumbled and towers lay in dust. In this endurance lay his quiet power, the power not of action but of being. And so Tom Bombadil remained, the figure of the enigma, the neutral heart of a world in conflict. To him, the wars of the age were passing storms. To others, his absence was unbearable. Yet in that absence lay a strange consolation, proof that the world was larger than war, and that even in the fiercest struggle there existed one who could laugh without fear. Neutrality, then, was not escape but mystery, and mystery itself became his legacy. Tolkien himself, when pressed about the mystery of Tom Bombadil, chose silence more often than certainty. In letters to his correspondents, he admitted that Bombadil was a deliberate enigma, a figure meant to remain outside the structures of the tale. He was not created to resolve questions, but to raise them, not to serve as an answer, but as a reminder that not all things can or should be explained. This deliberate silence was not an omission but a choice, a gesture of humility within the grandeur of his legendarium. For in a world so carefully wrought, where genealogies stretched for ages and languages bore roots deeper than mountains, Tolkien left Bombadil as the one gap, the one silence that resisted the net of lore. Readers have often struggled with this silence, pressing for definitions, for categories, for some corner of the mythology into which Tom could be neatly fitted. Was he a Maya, a Vala, a spirit of Arda itself, or something older still? Each theory sought to enclose him, to give him a name that would settle the unease. But Tolkien's own words resist this. He wrote that Bombadil was the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside, or that he represented the willfully unexplained. In these admissions, the author reminded us that myths, however vast, must leave spaces unmeasured. To define everything is to diminish wonder. To leave something undefined is to honor the mystery of creation. The decision to keep the Bombadil unexplained carries its own kind of theological weight. For Tolkien, a devout Catholic, the world was suffused with mystery, and creation was larger than human comprehension. To insert a figure into Middle-earth who remained ungraspable was to imitate, in narrative, the reality of the unknown within life itself. Bombadil was not a flaw in the tale, but an echo of its deepest foundation, that not all knowledge belongs to us, and that some mysteries exist, not to be solved, but to remind us of the limits of our sight. In this way, the silence surrounding him becomes reverence, a form of narrative worship that accepts unknowing as part of truth. Yet this silence also unsettles, for it leaves us in tension. The ring demanded action, demanded choice, demanded clarity of allegiance. And into that storm stepped Bombadil, who laughed at the ring, played with it, and set it aside as though it were nothing at all. To the reader, this raises unbearable questions. If such immunity exists, why does it not save the world? Why is such a figure confined to one valley, absent from the councils and the wars? Tolkien did not answer. Because the answer is not the point. The silence forces us to carry the question ourselves, to wrestle with the paradox of power without ambition, of freedom without responsibility. In this deliberate omission lies a subtle act of narrative design. For by refusing to answer, Tolkien ensured that Bombadil would haunt the tale, far beyond his brief chapters. Characters who resolve themselves into clear roles are remembered, but mysteries are pondered endlessly. In Bombadil's absence, the reader returns again and again to his presence, wondering, questioning, imagining. This narrative silence extends his life beyond the page, turning him into a perpetual question that cannot be buried. He becomes more enduring than heroes and villains precisely because he remains unexplained. And so, his silence is not only Tolkien's, but also the world's. For in Middle-earth itself, the characters move on without explanation. The council debates and dismisses him. The ring-bearers remember him with fondness, but never see him again. Gandalf, who seemed to know all riddles, speaks of him only with careful vagueness, as though even he did not dare to enclose Tom within a definition. The world itself leaves him unnamed, as though it has chosen to keep one corner of creation untouched by clarity. This deliberate silence also teaches us something of myth itself. Myths are not encyclopedias. They are not meant to answer every question. They are living landscapes, filled with peaks and valleys, where some paths are mapped and others remain hidden. To include Bombadil is to remind us that in every story there must remain a horizon we cannot cross. Without it, the world becomes flat, reduced to what can be explained. With it, the world remains alive, always hinting at more. Bombadil is that horizon, the unseen depth that assures us Middle-earth is larger than its wars. For Frodo, this silence carried its own echo. He could not explain Tom, but he could remember him, and in memory, Bombadil became both question and comfort, a sign that the world contained joys unthreatened by shadow. The lack of explanation did not lessen his presence. It deepened it. Frodo carried that silence within him even as he sailed into the West, a quiet certainty that not all things needed to be known in order to be true. In the end, Tolkien's deliberate choice leaves us with a paradox. The more we ask of Bombadil, the less we receive, and yet the more we ask, the more his presence grows. He is enlarged by silence, expanded by omission, sustained by the refusal of an answer. In a world of exhaustive lore, he remains the one corner where the light of mystery shines unbroken. This is his true power, greater even than his indifference to the ring, that he reminds us of the humility of unknowing, the reverence due to mystery itself. And so, the silence that surrounds him is not empty, but full, not absence, but presence. It is the silence of the sacred, where the refusal to explain is itself the explanation. Bombadil remains, laughing by his river, master of his small circle, immune to power, untouched by ruin. And we remain pondering him, carrying forward a riddle we will never solve, and in that pondering, honoring the mystery that makes Middle-earth not only a story but a world. The last mystery of Middle-earth is not written in battles, nor carved upon the stones of kingdoms. It lingers instead in the figure of a man with bright boots and a feathered hat, who sang beneath the trees and laughed at the weight of power. Tom Bombadil endures where all else has faded, untouched by the long tragedies of elves and men, unscarred by the downfall of Sauron, unmarked by the passing of ages. He is not bound to the chronology of Middle-earth, nor to the hierarchies of its powers. He remains, not explained, not resolved, but abiding, a presence beyond endings. And in this endurance lies his final gift, to remind us that not all mysteries are meant to be closed. When the ring was unmade, and the world shifted upon its axis, Many stories reached their natural conclusion. Aragorn became king, his line restored, the elves departed, their fading complete. The dwarves turned again to their halls, and the hobbits returned to their fields. Even Frodo's story, heavy with wounds, reached its close upon the shores of the sea. But Tom's story did not close. It did not arc or bend. It did not demand a final chapter. He remained singing in his valley, as he had before, as he would after, unchanged and unconcerned. His tale is not one of beginnings or endings, but of continuance, and this continuance unsettles. For in the rhythm of myth we expect resolution. We expect that each thread will be gathered into a pattern, that each question will find its answer. Bombadil denies this. He is the thread left deliberately loose, the note that never resolves into harmony. His laughter carries on beyond the tale, echoing outside the frame of the story, reminding us that Middle-earth is larger than its wars, and that not all truths can be bound to destiny. He is not the climax of a tale, but the silence beyond it, the reminder that mystery itself is part of creation. Some have said he is the spirit of the vanishing countryside, and indeed he is a preservation of what is simple, joyful, unbroken. Others claim he is older than the music, the fragment of creation untouched by discord. Still others call him merely a riddle, a puzzle never to be solved, yet all these names, whether poetic or precise, fall short. For Bombadil resists containment not by accident, but by design. Tolkien gave him to us not to explain, but to endure. He is not meant to be a key, but a door left open, a passage into the unknown spaces that keep a world alive. The legacy of Bombadil is not in deeds remembered, nor in songs sung of his battles, for he fought none. His legacy is in absence, in the reminder that life is more than the struggle against darkness. Even in an age of despair, his house was filled with laughter, with lilies, with the songs of rivers. He did not save Middle-earth, but he preserved the knowledge that Middle-earth contained more than ruin. He was a vision of wholeness beyond the contest of shadow and light, and that vision endured, however briefly glimpsed. For Frodo, this vision was both burdened and balm. It showed him that the ring's power was not absolute, but it also revealed that such immunity could not join him in his suffering. Frodo bore scars, while Tom remained untouched. The contrast made Frodo's wounds heavier, yet also reminded him of what lay beyond them. In memory, Bombadil became the symbol of a wholeness Frodo could never reclaim, but which nevertheless existed, and that existence gave meaning even to sorrow. For readers, Bombadil remains the final enigma, the one corner of Middle-earth left unmeasured. His immunity to the ring, his confinement to his land, his indifference to war, all these resist explanation. But perhaps explanation is not what we are meant to seek. Perhaps we are meant instead to rest for a moment in his house, to hear Goldberry's song, to watch the river gleam in the fading light, to taste bread and honey at his table, and to remember that even the greatest stories must pause to honor the smallest joys. Bombadil's endurance is his final lesson. Kingdoms will rise and fall, towers will crumble, ships will sail into the west, and even the greatest of rings will be cast into fire. But Tom will still sing, his boots bright, his laughter echoing, his world preserved in harmony. He is not power, nor resistance, nor salvation. He is the mystery of being itself, a presence beyond struggle. In him lies the reminder that life is not exhausted by conflict, that there are songs which belong to no war, laughter that belongs to no crown, joy that belongs to no triumph. Thus, the story closes not with resolution but with reverence. Bombadil remains unexplained, and in that silence his meaning grows. He is the last mystery of Middle-earth, the figure who proves that no tale can contain all truths, that no world is complete without what it cannot define. He is the unanswered question, the open horizon, the laughter that endures beyond shadow. And so, though his part in the tale is small, his presence is vast, filling the world with the echo of what cannot be owned, commanded, or destroyed. The tale of Middle-earth ends, but Bombadil does not. He remains by his river, singing songs that no shadow can silence, reminding us that mystery is not weakness but strength, not absence but abundance. And in that reminder lies his true gift, that some things are meant to endure without explanation, and that the world is fuller for the mysteries it will never answer. There are figures in myth who blaze brightly, crowned by deeds and measured by victories. Kings whose names fill chronicles, warriors who carve their legacies upon battlefields, sages whose wisdom guides nations. Yet Tom Bombadil stands apart from all such reckonings. His story is not sung in the halls of kings, nor carved upon stone, nor carried westward upon elven ships. His story lingers instead like a fragrance upon the air, faint but unforgettable, the memory of a song half heard in a meadow, the glimpse of a figure striding in bright boots along a riverbank. He is less a character in the tale than a reminder that tales themselves are never whole. Always there is something that remains beyond the telling. Always there is mystery. In the end, this is Bombadil's truest gift, to resist conclusion. The War of the Ring ended in fire, and from that fire a new age arose. Elves departed, dwarves rebuilt, men rose again to dominion, and hobbits tended their quiet fields. The world shifted and settled into new patterns, and much that had been strange was explained or given place. But Bombadil remained unplaced. He endured not because he was victorious, nor because he was forgotten, but because he did not belong to ending. His existence is the insistence that not everything must be drawn into the circle of closure. Some things must stand outside, preserving the open horizon that keeps a story alive even after it has ended. Consider the memory of the hobbits. Frodo's journey was a road of wounds, Sam's a path of fidelity, Merry's and Pippin's a march into the world of men, yet each of them in their quietest hours would recall a house of song and light in the old forest, a place where lilies floated and laughter rang louder than shadow. They would remember a man who treated the ring as nothing, who offered them bread and comfort without demand. That memory was not conclusion, but balm. It did not answer their questions, but it steadied their hearts. And so Bombadil's legacy was carried not in lore but in recollection, not in history but in longing. To readers the same truth holds. His chapters come early, almost forgotten amid the thunder of later events, and yet they return again and again in the mind, stubbornly resistant to dismissal. We wonder who he is, and in wondering we extend the life of Middle-earth beyond its written bounds. For as long as Bombadil is pondered, the story never quite ends. His mystery keeps it alive, like an ember that will not go out. In this sense, Bombadil is not an interruption but a promise, proof that the world of Tolkien's creation is larger than its narrative, richer than its resolution. He is the eternal remainder, the fragment that keeps the world open. The final mystery of Bombadil is that he requires us to accept not knowing. In a world of carefully wrought maps, genealogies, and chronologies, he is the blank space. He is the silence in the song, the figure who resists definition, and in that resistance, he teaches us something about how to inhabit stories. Not every question can be answered, not every figure can be named, not every power can be measured, and perhaps it is better so. For the moment all is explained, the world shrinks. To leave Bombadil unexplained is to keep the world wide, to let imagination wander beyond the page. This deliberate openness carries a resonance beyond literature. For in life, as in story, not all mysteries resolve. There are presences that slip past comprehension, joys that cannot be explained, griefs that cannot be solved, silences that speak louder than words. Bombadil mirrors these realities. He is not a puzzle to be solved, but an invitation to dwell with mystery, to accept that the unknown is not a flaw, but a feature of the world. His presence whispers that life is more than power, more than war, more than resolution. Life is also song, laughter, lilies, rivers. Life is also what abides outside the tale of triumphs and tragedies. In this way, Bombadil becomes not only a character, but a philosophy. He embodies the truth that being can exist without purpose, that joy can exist without struggle, that mystery can exist without resolution. He unsettles because we are trained to demand answers, to bind all things into meaning. Yet he endures because we know, somewhere within us, that mystery itself is meaning. To preserve a mystery is to preserve wonder, and to preserve wonder is to preserve. And so, when all other threads are tied, when the tale of the ring is closed with both triumph and sorrow, Bombadil remains. He is not seen at coronation, nor farewell. He is not mentioned in the annals of men. He does not stand upon the grey havens as the ships depart. He does not fade with the elves, nor rise with the kingdoms of men. He endures in silence, in laughter, in song, beyond the sight of endings. And because he endures, the story never wholly closes. The last vision of Middle-earth, then, is not only of Frodo's departure nor Aragorn's reign, but of a small house by the Withywindle, where a man in yellow boots sings as his beloved gathers flowers by the water. Outside, the world moves on into new ages. Inside, the song continues, untouched, eternal. And we who cannot follow Frodo into the west, who cannot walk the roads of elves or kings, can at least rest in that song, knowing that somewhere in the deep heart of the tale, laughter still rings. This is Bombadil's legacy. Not answer, but endurance. Not resolution, but reminder. He tells us that even in the greatest of myths, there must remain mystery. And in mystery there is life. The story of Middle-earth closes, but Bombadil does not. He is the open door, the lingering note, the song that will not end. And in that song we hear both comfort and unease, both joy and riddle, both presence and absence. He is not explained, but he is unforgettable. And in that he becomes not the smallest part of the tale, but the largest. Thus the story ends as it began, not with answers but with wonder. Tom Bombadil remains, striding through the meadows, singing into the silence, his boots bright, his laughter undimmed. He is the last mystery, and perhaps the greatest. For in refusing to be contained, he preserves the truth that no story is final, no world complete, no mystery exhausted. He endures, and in his endurance, Middle-earth itself endures in us. The end.